And here we are again. Uh, these I don't know if the episodes are going and coming really fast or time itself is traveling a little fast. I try to do these at a certain. I will admit that I haven't necessarily remained consistent on the day, but I've been consistent uh, throughout the week, like in a sense of weekly. There's a weekly consistency, and there might not necessarily be a specific day, but you're gonna get one of these at least once a week, and I can at least guarantee. I won't promise. I teach my kids all the time never to promise anything, but I can guarantee you that. Um, it's an interesting week, and I'll get into some of that in a second. But as always, let's just start off with some mindfulness, focusing on our breath. Um, Starting now. And we're here, as always, right? It's like I look forward to these, um, and whenever fresh out of mindfulness, we always start off with a puzzle, and I have one for you today. And the puddle. My words aren't coming to me today, but the puzzle is, um, what do you lose the moment you share it? What do you lose the moment you share it? And as we think about that, we're gonna go into today's conversation. I want to say it's an interesting week. It is New York City Tech Week, which is always fun. Uh, I'm more intentional this time around, finding uh, events that specifically align with where I want to see Ayunta as a company, sharing the spaces with like-minded creatives in the space and stakeholders in that particular space. But it's been interesting because this it gives me an opportunity to see like creatives who share the same like form of creativity that I do, which is in technology and innovation. To kind of be in a room with them is always interesting. We get to share ideas and everything that we're working on. And one of the things that happened to me last night, I went to an event. Was in conversation. I was talking to this guy. I want to say his name is Ben. And we were talking about technology from different vantage points, and we hit like multiple different topics. And in each topic, I felt like I had valuable contributions, and but I wasn't conscious of it until every time I made a contribution, the individuals within the conversation recognized that, and they were like, "Oh man, that too." And then it almost felt like they were keeping like a tally of like the things that I'm doing. And I know we had talked about this idea of jack of all trades in a previous episode, but when it happens in real time, in real life, it's always interesting. And then I was reminded of like all the things that I have my hand in, or I actively work on. But then that was my night. And then today, what happened was I spent a lot of time thinking about where I was and who I was and what I did to get all these ideas out. And a huge part of that was one, being confident enough to say it out loud that, hey, I want to do this thing, to myself. It went from just a thought inside my head to at some point I had to tell somebody. But after I told somebody, I had to say it even louder, so the world knows. And I've never had a fear of sharing my ideas. We talked about this in the last episode. Like, I think ideas are meant to be to share. They are meant to be shared, and they should be collaborative. And I've always taken that approach. And it got me to think how I know a bunch of creatives who don't necessarily aren't the quickest to share their ideas. And it made me think about, and I started to question the why. And I think I narrowed it down to a couple of things. One, there's a fear, or fear. Fear of failure. And I don't, as much as I can blame the individual, like, but I can't, because in my own life, I was doing some reflecting and I realized that I was raised to not be comfortable with taking social risks. I was raised to fear public failure. And it wasn't like, I don't know if it was a conscious thing. And I can remember like conversations with my mother, and like she would always tell me like, oh, you got to be humble. But what she would always say is like, hey, don't say things you don't know that you're actually going to be able to do, because what if you fail? And it made sense, like hearing it, but I would still go off and say the things that I wanted to say and follow them up. But I don't know that whatever, I think my mom was trying to protect me in that regard, but and she meant well. But as I grew older, having actively live in my creativity and continue to live in my creativity, I realized that creativity is risk. Creativity is having the ability to accept failure. Because if creativity leads to innovation, if creativity ultimately is leading to something groundbreaking, then it has to push the boundaries of whatever we consider normal. There has to be some level of risk taking. And I'm not, and I want to add clarity to, because I even used to think that the risk I was talking about, and I like I mentioned this online before, like it's almost like a childlike risk where children aren't scared to take risk. They're not scared to walk on the edge. And yes, that's one type of risk, and yes, there's a creative element associated with that. But that's not the risk I want to talk about in particular. I want to talk about the social risk. This idea of how you're going to be perceived if you fail, and are you willing to compromise your social status or how you're perceived based on whatever idea, the success of whatever idea you create or generate? And I think most people aren't. And I get it, right? Because I've personally never seen failure as a loss. There's a saying that says every loss is a lesson, and that's how I always saw it, as a lesson learned. I think being an entrepreneur, one thing I learned is every failure is almost like a trigger for a pivot, and the key to any successful entrepreneurship journey, or if you were to analyze the journey of any successful entrepreneur, it is it there are significant milestones or occurrences that led to success that were based on pivots, and those pivots are a result of failure, learning from the failure, and then adjusting to it. And you can extrapolate from that. Just in its simplest form, it's just this creative journey, right? Going down this process and then realizing, hey, what I thought wasn't true, but I learned and I corrected it. And I think most people fear that. They fear. I know my lady's gonna correct me. This is how I'm saying this word, but pardon me. But most people fear that idea, the idea of doing something and not being successful at it. Making a suggestion or a creative idea and it not having not getting the reception that you'd want, or being rejected by either your peers or the community in general. And I just speaking of earlier, I talked about this is New York Tech Week, and there was a founder in particular who was telling his story in a particular meeting that we had. There was an event where around fintech, and he showed up, and there was all this conversation happening, but most of it was anecdotal and it was based off your own experience. And I felt like he had a story to tell because he felt like he found an innovative way to solve a problem using some social engineering, and it worked for him. And he saw an opportunity to bring this innovation to a space that could use it. And he did. And it wasn't received well. Was he wrong? No, he wasn't. Was the idea great? It depends. For him, it was. I know for a lot of other people, it was. But maybe for this particular audience, it wasn't. And in that moment, I hope the lesson that he learned wasn't that his idea was bad or wrong. It was more so that maybe that's just not the room or the audience for it in that particular moment. But I think what he experiences in that moment is what most of us as creatives fear. This idea that what happens if we fail? And that makes us risk averse. It makes us failure averse. And we get stuck. We create this imaginary limitations on our creativity because we are scared of the idea of it not being received well. But that is a part of the creative process. And I think that is something that we have to understand. And I personally cannot tell you how to get over it outside of just doing it, because it I don't think it stings as hard as you think it would if you've never tried before. If you've never tried to take a risk publicly and position yourself for scrutiny, it seems like this devastating social impact, right? And I've had it happen to me like multiple times, and it's honestly a lesson learned. Who executed really well are comedians, and some are obvious in this trial and error, tossing out creative ideas publicly. I've seen one comedian take a actual notebook on stage and would toss an idea for a joke that they had out into the audience, and based on their reception, he might say, "All right, I might keep that. I'll leave that. What if I tweak it this way?" And it's this. It's almost. It's this live feedback that those are the type of experience that sharpen your creativity and then sharpen your ability to create innovative things, because you're pushing the boundaries for everyone and everything in those particular moments. And I think when you get to the point where when you understand how impactful risk-taking, or how synonymous risk-taking is with creativity, and how synonymous social failure is with creativity, and you're able to overcome those things, you'll notice almost like a creative boost, or an amplified version of your creativity, because the things that were these invisible limitations will no longer be there. But like I said, I don't know how to coach you through that. I mean, we're all different individuals, and we are all experiencing life differently. But I think one thing is for certain, that once you do overcome the fear of failure, you tend to be more innovative, you are more creative, and it just feels like you're living a fuller life, because again, you don't care how it's received. As much as you want people to be receptive of it, them not being receptive of it is not enough of a deterrent for you to not try. And I think that's the important part here. It's like, it's less about whether or not the idea is good. It's more about actually doing the thing, getting over the fear of not doing it. And I think that's an important part of this. As I was kind of like going through this thought, I stumbled upon a reading and a quote from Pablo Picasso. He said, "I am always doing that which I cannot do, in order that I may learn how to do it." And I think that's powerful. And one of the things I've always said, if you've talked to me long enough, being comfortable makes me uncomfortable. And I have to constantly be doing something different, and trying new things and exposing myself to new things. And again, it's a double-edged sword. It's a gift and a curse. I think the things with my family, I might go out and get something for my family, and then when I go back to get it, like in the grocery store or something, and I see a variation of it, I'm willing to try it. The rest of my family, not so much. But I need to constantly be taking some sort of risk, pushing the boundaries of what my own perception of life is, and challenging that. I don't know why I do it. And this is not something that I do like privately. I've publicly disrupted ideas and intentions purely because I think with innovation comes evolution, with evolution comes innovation, and I think if we continuously push the boundaries, then we can revolutionize our own lives, the industries we exist in, and the spaces we occupy, and just life in general. But that is my thought for this week. Think of the thing that you are most fearful of, and say it out loud. Tell somebody. Think of an idea that you fear it not being received well, and say it out loud. Put it on your social media and see how it's received. You'd be surprised. Maybe at the other end of it is not failure. And if it is failure, learn how to be receptive of it and learn from it. And in doing so, you're challenging yourself to come up with more disruptive ideas, right? There's a saying, and I'm thinking of it right now, but I don't know if I'll say it. If I'll say it the right way, if I just like say it now. But there's a I'm totally butchering this. But the saying is something along the lines of, if everybody is receptive and accepting of your idea, then it's not a good enough idea. Something along those lines, and I believe it, right? I think if you intend to disrupt, to push the boundaries, to challenge what's normal, those ideas are going to be the ones that most people run away from. Most people question, most people challenge, and most people reject. And when they start rejecting, just know that you're going in the right direction. You're moving in the direction of innovation, and then just continue down that path. Eventually they'll catch up, and then you'll be the pioneer, the front runner, the creator of bleeding edge and cutting edge technology and innovation and art. And that's that for a lot of us. That's why we're in it, right? We play this game for those particular reasons. But yeah, don't whatever fear you have, especially socially, say it out loud. If you have a dream to build something, put it out in the universe. If you have an idea that you think is going to disrupt, say it. And maybe somebody else is going to see it who, if you're lacking resource, has a resource to get you there. Or you might find somebody with a similar thought process. And then when you combine your thoughts together and your ideas together, that was a spark that you needed to kind of see it come to fruition. So don't ever be afraid to share those ideas. With that, we're going to end how we started. Back to that riddle. I think it was a riddle. What do you lose the moment you share it? What do you lose the moment you share it? A secret. It is no longer a secret the moment you share it. With that, I'll see you guys next week. I can't say same time, same place, because we talked about how the days aren't necessarily consistent. But next week for sure, you'll see me. I'll end it how I always end it. Go be great.